Welcome back to Fox Explainer. Today, I'll show you The Aeronauts, an adventure movie from 2019 that is based on a true story. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. In a balloon, a man and a woman fight against the wind high in the air. Since throwing away all the weight doesn't work, the man jumps off to save his love. This is a memory that came back to Amelia Wren, an aeronaut who is nervous about her first balloon flight in over 2 years. Antonia, her sister, thinks she shouldn't fly if she doesn't feel well, but Amelia is stubborn and says she just needs a moment. In 1862, most people in London have come to watch the balloon take off. Scientist James Glacier will be going on this trip. His friend and fellow scientist John True is worried about the dark clouds in the sky. James says he has done the math and it would be fine, and the man who has put his money into this flight and wants to see it happen backs him up. So John can worry all he wants, but the balloon will take off today. Amelia is late, but she makes a big deal out of it because she knows that ticket sales pay for their flights. She arrives in a bright, circus-like dress while riding on the roof of her coach car. She then jumps around the balloon platform making jokes and trying to get James to join in. Even though James tries to stop her, she brings a dog that can fly with them. Amelia finally lets go of the balloon before James has a chance to finish taking notes and measurements. She had just given a speech about adventure and promised to beat the French record of 2,3000 feet. As soon as they are a few feet above the platform, she climbs up to the balloon hoop, drops the dog, who has been carrying a parachute the whole time, and makes a safe landing as part of the show. As they fly over London and look at the beautiful view, James pulls out his binoculars and looks at the British Society building. This makes him think of how everything started. 2 years ago, he and John climbed up on a roof to watch another balloon take off. Later, James asked the British Society for money to go on a similar expedition, but he was turned down because everyone makes fun of him for thinking the weather can be predicted, as if they were fortune tellers. Even James's parents hear the insults, which hurts them as much as it hurts him. Back in the present, Amelia takes off her show dress and puts on warmer clothes, and James sends his first readings by pigeon. As the balloon rises, they go into a cloudy area, and Amelia worries about a storm just like John. James says his predictions don't include a storm, but the weather soon proves him wrong. Lightning starts to strike around them, and a very strong wind starts to blow, shaking the balloon along. James falls on the bottom of the basket and hits his head, causing it to bleed. Amelia refuses to land the balloon because she knows how to get out of the storm. They just need to fly higher, getting above the clouds. James and Amelia are pushed out of the basket when the wind suddenly makes the balloon shake very hard. Before the wind hits them again, they manage to hold onto the hoop. James falls into the basket, but Amelia is left hanging onto one of the ropes. James isn't very strong, and the wind keeps blowing against them, so it's hard for him to help her climb back up. He solves the problem by tying himself to the basket, then giving Amelia his hand and bringing her back inside. As soon as she gets in, she starts throwing sandbags out, which helps the balloon rise and leave the clouds behind. At this height, everything is completely quiet, and the soft sunlight touches them. As they move the ropes to make the balloon stay up better, they get to see an aureole, a beautiful sight that James had only seen in books before. The two have fun yelling into the void, but all of a sudden, the humid weather lets them hear sounds from the city. James starts taking notes when he finds out about this, but Amelia can't help but think back to her last flight, when her husband Pierre Rennes died. Amelia wouldn't leave the house after her husband died. She drank a lot and wouldn't even take a bath. For 2 years, this kept going on. Antonia got tired of seeing her like this a few weeks ago, so she forced her back into the real world by taking her to a family party. Amelia wasn't having a good time there, and it was clear why. All the men, except one, were too scared of her to talk to her. James made small talk with her before he told her the real reason he was talking to her. He wanted her to agree with his plan to explore the sky to show that it was possible to predict the weather. Amelia quickly figured out that James had gone to that party without being invited. Even though she usually doesn't care about someone's social status, she didn't like the fact that he had lied to her. But James gave her a heartwarming speech about how much such discoveries could help people, so Amelia gave in and agreed to work with him. When Antonia heard about this later, she called Amelia out on it, saying that she was running away from her problems and that the happiness she found in the air came from her husband, not the balloon. Back in the present, Amelia is recovering from her panic attack. James asks her about her husband, but she won't talk about him. While she takes care of his head wound, a kaleidoscope of butterflies flies around them, which is a wonderful surprise. James is especially surprised because he never thought butterflies could fly this high, even though John was sure they could because he had studied them. This backs up what his friend said. Amelia tells James about Pierre's love for the beauty of the world. She is moved by the beautiful moment and thanks him for not making her talk about it. Once more, Amelia starts to think about what happened to bring them here. She decided not to go on the trip after hearing her sister's worries. So, even though women weren't allowed in the building, she went in to tell James that the expedition was cancelled and that she would never fly in a balloon again. Later that night, James went to see his parents. He told his mother the news, but he didn't tell his father because he was already having trouble remembering things. At least he remembered how to use the telescope James gave him, and he also remembered how to use it on the way back. So he gave his son a pair of binoculars to use once he got to the sky. Back at the balloon, which is starting to get covered in frost, James is letting Amelia help him take notes. This time, the numbers are exciting. They watch as they go higher and higher, and they celebrate when they finally beat the record set by the French. This makes them the people who have flown the highest in the history of mankind. After shaking hands and thanking each other for the chance, James sends out another pigeon with his findings, and Amelia tells him to put on some warmer clothes. James didn't bring any to keep the weight down, so Amelia wants to land the balloon so her friend doesn't freeze to death. James won't let her do that. Instead, he talks to her about how important what they are doing is and shows her how beautiful the night sky is. Amelia remembers that she, not just her husband, finds happiness in flying, so she agrees as long as she gets to decide when it's too hard to keep going. Since James agrees, she throws another bag of sand out. Amelia changed her mind about going on the trip the night before a new memory starts. John went to see her. He didn't go because James told him to, but because he wanted to tell her the trip was worth the risk. He showed her James' research notes, where he had drawn some beautiful snowflakes, and he admitted that sometimes James was wrong. For example, he said it would snow tonight, but it didn't. But he also found some amazing facts, and John thought it was Amelia's job to help science move forward. After he left, Amelia went to Pierre's grave to think about it. She made up her mind when James's prediction that it would snow came true. Back in the present, there is frost all over the balloon and even on the people. James sends out a pigeon, but as soon as it tries to fly, it falls, and the last one he sent out is already dead. Now, if something bad happens, no one will know where they are, so James starts to worry. Amelia has to stop him from throwing out a lot of their stuff. She tells him that his mood and the fact that his nose is bleeding are signs of hypoxia, which means his brain isn't getting enough oxygen. She wants to go down, but James wants to do what Pierre did and risk his life for science, so Amelia hits him. The real story of what happened isn't heroic. Amelia pushed the balloon too hard, and the seams tore apart. No matter what they tried, they couldn't get the balloon to go down, so Pierre jumped out of the balloon to save Amelia. After hearing this story, James says he's sorry for the way he's been acting and agrees that it's time to go down. Amelia pulls on a rope to open the gas valve, but nothing happens because of the frost. So, after telling James to stay awake and not let the hypoxia win, she starts climbing to the top to open the valve by hand. This is hard to do because her fingers are starting to get frostbite, but she keeps going until she slips and ends up hanging upside down from the rope. Amelia decides that she can't let her husband's death be for nothing. She pulls herself together and starts climbing again, this time with a rope tied around her waist in case she falls again. When Amelia gets to the top, James has already passed out. She tries to push the valve with her elbow, but it's stuck, so she has to risk getting up and kicking it. This does work, but she has to take her shoe off and put it between the valve and the balloon to keep it open. After she does this, she also passes out. She wakes up a few minutes later when the balloon starts to fall and she falls off the edge. On the ground, Amelia's family and the British Society are worried because they haven't seen the balloon fly back yet, and the estimated time of arrival has already passed. Still, they try to stay positive because hearing about them usually means hearing about a disaster, so they should take the silence as a good sign and just wait. Amelia is hanging from the rope she had tied around her waist when she got to the balloon. This rope saved her life. She makes it swing twice so she can reach the basket, and when she gets back inside, she tries to wake up James. At first, he doesn't answer, and Amelia worries that she may have lost him. Thankfully, though, after she shakes him a lot, he finally comes when she calls. He takes their final readings before taking care of her frostbite hands. He only stops when it starts to snow to catch some snowflakes to study later. After that, they sit and wait for the balloon to finish coming down. Amelia tells his sister that she's figured out why she wants to fly again. She wants everything she's lost to have meant something. In return, James talks about some of the things he's found, but the most important thing is that he's seen beauty that can't be found in books and that they've brought the stars closer. Amelia agrees with both of these things. Amelia notices all of a sudden that the snow isn't falling, it's just hovering. This means that they are moving at the same speed as the snow. Only one thing can explain this. The balloon is going flat. After taking out the valve and her shoe, they start tossing things out of the basket to lose weight. This includes their jackets and James' tools after he rips his notes out of the notebook. Still, this isn't enough. For a moment, they think they have no chance, but then James has an idea. They should both climb onto the balloon hoop, and then James should cut the ropes to let the basket go with them. Now that the balloon is falling at a dangerously fast rate, Amelia thinks about making the same sacrifice as her husband, but James stops her just in time. He comes up with a new plan. They cut the strings that hold the balloon together and pull up the silk, turning the balloon into a parachute. Now it's going down more slowly, but they are still in for a wild ride. The balloon hits some trees and James falls out, then it drags Amelia through the ground until it stops. She passes out for a few minutes, and when she comes to, she rushes to find James, meeting him halfway because he was also looking for her. They help each other get back on their feet and go home. On that day, they are thought to have reached a height of 3,700 feet, or 7 miles. Their success makes the news, and James' parents are happy to hear about it. His results show that the atmosphere has different layers, which led to the first weather forecasts and earned James the respect of his peers. After spending some time with her sister and nieces, because she shouldn't forget to live, Amelia and James build a new balloon so they can go flying again and continue their research. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more and hit the like button to help me out, and also leave a comment if you want me to explain your favorite film. Until next time, take care.